I was going to get some beer. I should have. That's a great way to start this off.
Wonderful.
Hey, this is Alan with GameLark, and I'm doing a new episode of GameLark Chats, this time with Psychotrip, and he is a YouTuber. Well, I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey guys, Trip here. I am a YouTuber. I run the channel Psychotrip, where we talk about video games, mostly video games, also a bit of movies and comic books, nerd stuff. That's the type of stuff we talk about. And I focus on atmosphere and immersion and character development and narrative in, well, mostly video games.
That's right. And I actually discovered Psychotrip through a Reddit post about Morrowind. So he has a lot of videos on the Elder Scrolls series, and I thought it'd be a great idea for him to come and chat with me about the soundtrack because, as many people know, Elder Scrolls has a really powerful and moving soundtrack that a lot of gamers enjoy. So we're going to be talking about it. We're going to be talking about three main points, which are the style, the functionality, and the evolution of the Elder Scrolls soundtrack. So, well, first of all, I'm gonna ask you, what do you think? What's the style of the soundtrack in your mind?
I mean, so I started with Oblivion. That was the first Elder Scrolls game I ever played.
Okay.
I went back to Morrowind later, and of course I've played Skyrim. But Oblivion, Jesus Christ, that I have that soundtrack on my phone. It's one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. And I guess to answer your question about the style, honestly, the style is really, I'm trying to think of another word except for generic because it's so incredible. I can't call it that. It's, I guess, classic, epic fantasy music.
Yeah.
And that's interesting considering, what the Elder Scrolls is and how, even though a lot of people think it's just regular old fantasy, how far away from regular fantasy it is when you start reading up into the backstory. It's interesting how classic the music is, but it works because, honestly, all I can say is Jeremy Soule, the composer. It's the Oblivion. I can't tell how much of it is because I was pretty much raised on that game and how much of it is just because it's genuinely amazing music. But that music, that's the shit I listen to before I fall asleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's something so warm, so soothing, so just peaceful about that music that I've never heard in anything else in my entire life. And all of Jeremy Soule's music, I guess, it's capable of giving you a certain feeling. Mm-hmm. Like, if I were to take the music of Oblivion and put it in Skyrim, it would change the entire game. Not the gameplay, but my entire experience. Yeah, the mood.
Right.
I'm just thinking about that now. That's how incredible that music is, because Skyrim is obviously has more of an epic feel to it. Mm-hmm. And that fits the more rugged, cold, both literally and metaphorically, tone and nature of your environment. Whereas Oblivion, in Cyrodiil, it's so much more warm and soothing. And it's amazing how much of that is due sheerly because of the music itself. And I guess it's a testament to just how important sound design is in video games.
Right. And you didn't want to say it was generic, but I think a better term might be familiar, where it's something that immediately it's something, because you were saying there are parts of the game that are a little bit more far out there, but it's something you hear and you immediately, I think it has somewhat of like a Celtic or medieval influence to it, where it just sounds like this ancient, like, kind of classic feel to it.
Yeah. Which game are you talking about specifically?
Well, all of them, but you're right that there is a lot of differences between the soundtracks, and especially with Skyrim. I think the differences between Morrowind and Oblivion aren't as great as, say, Morrowind to Skyrim, and not just in terms of complexity. Skyrim really especially even from the first, the first trailer, which we'll get into, but the first trailer where they did the Dragonborn theme song. But I think another word that might come to mind is cinematic. It's something that And by cinematic, I mean it's more, with video games, there really are different styles depending on the genre, right? RPGs
Right.
kind of go for more atmospheric, less melody-driven soundtracks. And I think in main part because one, it could get repetitive after a while, right? Whereas
Yeah,
platformers and other types of games, you're not playing for 50 to 100 hours, right?
exactly.
And two, because it's not so distracting, it kind of allows you to relax a little bit, to breathe, to kind of explore the game. And then like I said, we're going to get into the functionality, especially for this series, but for the most part, I mean, RPGs generally tend to have that more orchestral feel to them.
Oh, yeah.
Even comparing to something like, Fable or Dragon Age, even those games have similar, I wouldn't say sounds, but similar, orchestral. But I don't know, Sky. I'm trying to think of like what are the main differences if I had to compare those three series. Like Fable to me has kind of like a whimsical soundtrack, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And Dragon
Fable.
Age is a little bit more serious. And then the Elder Scrolls, I don't even know where to throw that, like how to compare that.
It's funny. You're naming three series that I love in different ways, but three series that I love, and three series that I love not only but in part because of their music.
Hmm.
So for Fable is along with Elder Scrolls perhaps my favorite. It has perhaps my favorite soundtrack ever.
Yeah.
And you're right. There is a sort of whimsical, lighthearted tone to Fable's music. And in an industry where we're so obsessed with being dark and gritty, Fable's music it's just so refreshing.
Hmm.
Even when that game gets dark, even when that game gets serious, there's still that tether back to being a fantasy in the literal sense, be something fantastic,
Yeah.
something fun. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And for all of Fable's problems, I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording. That the atmosphere is something Fable consistently got right. And I think sound design, and I say sound design instead of just music because music is just one part of sound design in a
That's
video
true.
game.
That's definitely
But
true.
I really think that sound design, and that encompasses everything, is one of the most important things in regards to atmosphere in video gaming. Because if you were to put the music of say Oblivion or Skyrim into Fable, I would have an entirely different mindset going into that game
It wouldn't really
and
fit
experience
either.
that game. It wouldn't fit. And that's another thing. That's another thing about how important the
Well,
music and sound design is.
when you think about it, like Fable, like I said, the more whimsical music kind of fits, the more like it's kind of has like a little bit cartoonish animations. Like they're not realistic by any means. You know what I mean? At least the first three games. I don't know. I don't know what
Yeah.
they did with the other games, but and then Dragon Age. I'm trying to think of like how I would compare Dragon Age for some reason in me doesn't. I know some people possibly watching this are gonna disagree. It's not the soundtrack doesn't grab me as much as the Elder Scrolls does for some reason.
No, I'll agree. And
There's
I
certain
love
songs that are good, but it's not
yeah,
on the whole. It's not like when you hear Dragonborn or you hear songs from Oblivion or Morrowind. It's not the same. It seems even more in the background than those songs. I think if anything, like the tavern songs are awesome in Dragon Age.
tavern songs are great in every game. Can we just
That's true.
accept that? Like in World of Warcraft, another game that has, my God, incredible music. Also, another game that I was basically raised on, so I might be a bit biased, but that tavern music, both the new tavern music and the old school tavern music, that it's almost like it's brainwashing me every time I hear it. And that's what good music does. I know that sounds scary,
No, but it
good
conditions you
music,
to feel a certain way. That's what you
yes,
said. It's
I
emotional.
can't escape it. I can't escape that warm, fun, just it. I feel like I'm hanging out with my friends whenever I hear that music. And that's the feel you want from a tavern. You know what I mean?
Well, I think even
And
in real life, that's like the old tavern songs would be based on that, just trying to bring people together and
yeah. And to your point about Dragon Age, I'll definitely agree that the music in Dragon Age I mean, it's good. Like, just objectively speaking, it's good music, but
It's not as memorable.
Clear, yeah, no, it has nothing on Jeremy Soule or Danny Elfman. Like, you can't compare it. It's good music, but it's not even comparable to, again, the amount of brainwashing that happens in those other games we're mentioning. But yeah, I love Dragon Age. I don't even mention the second one because fuck that game, but I love Dragon Age.
Yeah.
And I think that, because see, Dragon Age has a weird place in my heart because I typically hate medieval fantasy, like just the regular old European medieval fantasy. But Dragon Age has always been an exception to me. And I know we're getting off the topic of games, but
No.
I love Dragon Age, and a lot of people don't give it enough credit, and I'm sad about that because it's EA and BioWare, and it's fun to make fun of them, and I make fun of them too. But I mean, Dragon Age is remarkable to me because it manages to be what should be a generic medieval European fantasy, but it does it so well. Like, every single Dragon Age race and culture has an analog to real life. But at the same time, it's so familiar, but at the same time, so different and so fantastical and so strange. And it's this interesting balance between European fantasy. Like, okay, so we know that people from Ferelden, they're British, obviously. People from Orlais, they're French. The Kunari, the guy with the horns,
Yeah.
they're the Ottoman Empire. They fill that role of, a foreign empire who has culture that's totally different from our own, and a moral compass totally different from our own, slowly invading us. Okay, so we know each role that these people fit, but at the same time, the details are so different, are so unique, are so interesting to me that I can accept the fact that, yeah, this is just medieval, mostly European analogs, but they do it so well.
Well, if I can piggyback off that, I think one reason that it's engaging is it's complex. Like, if you really dig into it, there's a lot of detail to it, like you said.
Yeah.
And two, the characters are immediately engaging. Like, the characters in the Dragon Age games and most BioWare games are really, really well done.
Yeah.
So those are two things. And then the religious system is really interesting.
That
like
is
that
so
game,
cool.
the religion is really at the core of the game. That's really what it's about. Because, I mean, it has everything to do with magic to, like, wars to everything. Like, religion may play such a huge part and that's not saying that doesn't happen in other fantasy games, but I feel like they built a lot of the cultures based around that one religion.
And see, that is the perfect example of what I'm trying to get at. Like, the Chantry is obviously an analog for Catholicism.
Right.
And the Tevinter version of the Chantry, the Tevinters, right? The ones who are like the wizards and the quote unquote evil empire. They're Eastern Orthodox. So it's classic Catholic versus Eastern Orthodox, and each side thinks the other side is evil. But it's both immediately familiar, but entirely strange. Like, when you really look deep into it, and the practices and the ritual and the beliefs. And that's what I think Dragon Age gets so right. And that sort of philosophy permeates everything. That idea of, okay, we're going to start with a base that is familiar, but we're going to take it to some bizarre extreme that keeps it fantasy. Like, again, the people from Orlais, they're French. We know they're French. They have French accents. They have French architecture. They have all the classic French culture. But it's like they injected it with steroids.
Right.
And took it to an extreme that's so ridiculous and so bizarre, but is still so believable because it has that base that you can latch onto.
What do you call it? They kind of amplified it, I guess.
Yes, because if you look at the lore for people from Orlais, for example, how France pre-revolution, they were so stuck up and so aristocratic and so hierarchical, and they take that to an extreme where the nobles in Orlais they wear masks whenever they leave the house because the peasants aren't worthy of looking upon their actual faces.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of bullshit Dragon Age does that
And they get away
I love
with it.
so much. Because they take it, like, just my basic personality demands that things just be completely balls out and batshit insane.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how I am. I grew up on the crazy lore of the Elder Scrolls, the stuff you don't see in the games, the stuff that you read about outside of the game.
Deep stuff.
Yeah, I grew up on, World of Warcraft, where, you'd have goblins in hot rods standing next to classical fantasy elves. I grew up on weird fantasy. And that's the type of shit I demand from my fantasy. And it's one of the reasons why I don't typically like European medieval fantasy, because I think it's too generic.
It doesn't go far enough for you.
Yeah, it doesn't go... Yeah. Sorry, I just banged on my desk. But
it's okay.
Yeah, it doesn't go far enough. But Dragon Age is that one example where it's like, you know what? I can accept this because you took something that is so, so relatable, but then inserted all this stuff, amplified it beyond any sense of reality, and made it something that's so interesting and intriguing. And you have that classic BioWare formula of, we're going to give you a good narrative. We're going to give you compelling characters.
Yeah.
All of that shit. Like, Dragon Age, along with Dishonored, are two series that I actually cannot believe that they built all of that lore, all of that backstory just for that one thing. Like, I'm convinced that Dishonored is based off of some sort of TV series we don't know about, or some sort of book series. Same thing with Dragon Age. Like, when the first Dragon Age came out, I was like, Jesus Christ, they made this shit from scratch.
And then
and
they
it
bankrupted the studio.
Yeah. But yeah, like, it's so fascinating to me, and that's the shit that I like to do. And like, I'm an amateur writer. Like, obviously I don't do anything really big or important, but like, I make my own stories. I share them with my friends and stuff.
Sure.
And I'm inspired by stuff like the Elder Scrolls is probably one of my favorite fantasy universes of all time. Mm-hmm. But they had time to build up all of that lore. It wasn't until the game Redguard, the little known Elder Scrolls spinoff, that the current Elder Scrolls lore existed. Before that, in the first two games, Arena and Daggerfall, it was basically just a Dungeons and Dragons knockoff. Mm-hmm. And then these two guys called Michael Kirkbride and Kurt Coleman came along and said, fuck that shit, we're gonna make hermaphroditic demigods and awesome badass black dudes who can split atoms with their swords and cause nuclear explosions, just crazy shit like that.
Yeah.
So they had time to build that up, and I respect them for that. But I'm just inspired by things like Dishonored and Dragon Age, who they went into this knowing that they wanted to make something incredibly deep and three-dimensional. They weren't just making a game, they were building a world and making a game that takes place in that world. And that's one of the most impressive things in video gaming, and it's a
kind
testament
of like
to
Tolkien.
How much video games can do. Yes, it is like Tolkien.
Where he created the world just to build up the language, and then he created the language, and he created the world to complement the language. Then he's like, well, I guess I should make a story, because I already have this humongous world with all these different like stories and lineages, and there's a huge history that goes back like thousands of years.
Like, he is the father of world building, which is what they call
Father of overachievers. Overachievers.
That too, because beforehand, like, if you look at like old school fantasy and sci-fi, like say H.P. Lovecraft or God, who's the guy who did Conan? He was like H.P. Lovecraft's best friend. Howard. I know his last name is Howard. If you look at the two of them, they're like the fathers of modern day sci-fi and fantasy. Sure. But they were making that stuff. They weren't necessarily looking at it in regards to, okay, let's make a whole world. They were just thinking, I want to make a cool story, and here's going to be all this mysterious stuff in the background.
Right.
it wasn't until, and I might be wrong about this, and I might have the dates wrong on who came first, but Tolkien was the guy who came along and said, you know what, let me make a cohesive universe out of all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, we thought that that was just the realm of books. Then we saw Star Wars, and we're like, okay, this movies can do that too.
Right.
Movies can world build as well. And then we see shit like the Elder Scrolls come along, and we're like, okay, games can do this too, and maybe they can do it even better because you're experiencing it.
And you can get as much or as little as you want, basically.
Exactly, because you can go through the entire, like, most people who play the Elder Scrolls games have no idea who Vivek is, what Kim is, what Amaranth is. They don't know that shit, and they don't need to. And because, like, an entire, like, world building is meaningless if you don't have a solid narrative.
Right.
I think that's where, like, Skyrim falls flat for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and to be honest, to be perfectly honest, the only Elder Scrolls games that had great narratives, in my opinion, were Daggerfall, maybe Redguard, and Morrowind.
Okay. I would kind of agree with that. I mean, Oblivion wasn't bad.
No, Oblivion had a solid story, but it wasn't great. Like, no. Oblivion had a story that was just what it needed to be.
Yeah.
And Skyrim was just, Jesus Christ, that was... I have to applaud Skyrim for going a bit further back to the Elder Scrolls' roots, because my biggest problem with Oblivion is the atmosphere. Because here's exactly what happened. And I've actually spoken to, I haven't spoken to Todd Howard, but I've spoken to some of the other people behind the Elder Scrolls and what happened with Oblivion. And remember, what I'm about to say isn't biased because Oblivion is one of my favorite games of all time. But
sure.
They'll tell you that Oblivion was the result of the Lord of the Rings movies. The atmosphere was the result of the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, we saw that. Like, if you look at it, like, if you look at the way Oblivion looked, it's like the actual realm of Oblivion as portrayed in the game Oblivion. It's just Mordor. If you look at the atmosphere of Cyrodiil, it's just Middle Earth. Like, they saw that shit and like, let's do that. And it pisses me off so much. And this is why I have a lot of mods that fix this. Cyrodiil was supposed to be like the weirdest province out of all of the Empire.
And it just kind of felt too generic.
Imperials were arguably the weirdest race out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because originally, I don't know if you know this, but Imperials were supposed to be kind of Greco-Byzantine, Amazonian, jungle-dwelling, aristocratic weirdos.
Wow.
They were supposed to be this perfect cross between sophistication and savagery. Like, imagine like Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire and all that weird architecture and shit.
Right.
Now imagine that is in an Amazonian jungle. Now imagine those Byzantine people are obsessed with Asian culture. They're not Asian, but they're obsessed with Asian culture.
Yeah.
Because Akavir in the Elder Scrolls is the analog for Asia.
Right.
So they're kind of obsessed with Akavir. So imagine a bunch of Byzantine people who are also kind of Amazonian, so they're covered in tattoos, and they have spears, and they live in a jungle, so they always wear like light armor, and they're normally shirtless, or just it's really hot and humid there, so they dress appropriately. And now imagine they're obsessed with Asian culture, so they'll have some of their buildings will look kind of Japanese, or will be a cross between Byzantine and Greek and Japanese and stuff like that. And a lot of them will have like heirlooms that are from Akavir, so they'll have like katanas and stuff like that. And now imagine that those people are what am I looking for? That those people are I lost my train of thought. I'm too much of this rum. But my point is that Imperials were like the weirdest group out of everyone in the Elder Scrolls.
Right.
And Cyrodiil itself was supposed to be like a jungle. It was supposed to be a giant jungle without any major roads, with rivers, and like instead of like major roads like you saw in Oblivion, it was supposed to be rivers, and people would like sail on little like gondolas and stuff across the land.
Hmm.
And it was supposed to be way, way weirder than what we got. But they retconned it all because, hey, Lord of the Rings is super popular. Let's, make it look like that.
Well, the funny thing is you're mentioning Lord of the Rings, and I think that you could kind of compare the Lord of the Rings, especially like the soundtrack, to Morrowind a little bit, or to the Elder Scrolls. I mean, like that it's that big like expansive soundscapes where it just the soundtrack feels large, right? And it kind of immerses you in an equally like large, and I hate to use the term, but epic world, right? And then I think that maybe you could kind of compare like Dragon Age to more like Game of Thrones, maybe, where it's a little bit like grittier and like.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of fucked up stuff in Dragon Age, and it's not, and like Game of Thrones has a few songs that are like really memorable, but for the most part, it's just there to serve the story. I don't know what Fable would be in terms of entertainment. Maybe like an older movie, like an older fantasy stuff.
In regards to fantasy, right now it's popular. There's two basic
grimdark
types. They're not even necessarily grimdark, but there's the political intrigue and that sort of thing. And then there's the classic high fantasy like Lord of the Rings.
Okay, yeah.
And Elder Scrolls, the reason why I always loved Elder Scrolls, especially Morrowind, is because it struck a balance. Elder Scrolls is just as much about elves and,
gods and stuff.
Living gods and crazy mythology and magic as it is about political intrigue and, the politics that go on between these living gods
Except in Skyrim.
Their own personal motivations and hubris and all of that shit. And it's this perfect balance between the two of them.
Except in Skyrim.
Skyrim, yeah.
And it's really...
And to be fair, Oblivion too. And one thing that I can say is that I remember Todd Howard actually said that his biggest regret for Oblivion was downplaying the political aspects of the Elder Scrolls. Because up until then, when the Elder Scrolls came into its own, with, again, Redguard and Morrowind was when the series really became its own universe. They were very political stories. They were that perfect balance between high fantasy, all that weird, crazy, strange stuff that you wouldn't normally see in your own world, with that very human political narrative as well. And Oblivion was actually supposed to have an entire faction, a noble faction, where you could join the nobles and see how they're reacting to the Oblivion crisis and rise through the ranks and end up becoming a duke and interacting with the Elder Council and all of that. But they had to cut all of that, and you can still see small remnants of it, and that just shows you how late in development they removed it. Like, if anybody remembers Oblivion and remembers the scene, the quest where they have to save the city of Kvatch.
That's like one of the early quests, right?
Yeah. Once you, when you find the Count dead, the Count of Kvatch dead, and you pick up his ring, because the guy says, bring me proof of his death, you take his ring and give it to the head of the Kvatch guard. That was supposed to be the start of the noble quest line. You were supposed to take the ring and become the Count of Kvatch.
Huh.
All of that was cut.
Wow.
And one of Todd Howard's greatest regrets, he has two regrets. One that he doesn't talk about much, but one of the head writers, Michael Kirkbride, talks about was that he wishes that Cyrodiil had stayed a jungle.
That would have been cool.
That bizarre, strange Amazonian jungle with Byzantine inhabitants. And Todd Howard says his biggest regret is cutting the political aspects of Oblivion. But yeah, we're talking about music here, so...
That's a perfect segue to say, well, that kind of wraps up the style of the soundtrack. I mean, I guess all of these world-building aspects, and we were comparing different game series with Fable and Dragon Age, but the gameplay and the world obviously affects the sound. And I think there are some like strange parts of the music, but for the most part, I think that music is kind of a bridge. So it's kind of it doesn't want to be too far out there, so that you can like the player can be comfortable exploring. Do you know what I mean? Like if it was too crazy, it would be a little bit like maybe dissonant or something like that for the player when they're engaging the world.
Yeah, you especially see that in sorry, you especially see that in Morrowind, where as much as I love that music, and it's so classic, and a lot of people are gonna kill me for saying this.
Then don't say it.
No, I'm gonna say it because
kidding.
I love Morrowind's music, but let's face it, the music didn't necessarily fit the environment.
No, you're right. And
Morrowind's music. Sorry, you're about to say.
No, I was just gonna say we could save a little bit of that for the next part, but finish your thought. We're gonna get into the functionality because Morrowind really, as we talk about the functionality in the different soundtracks, you'll see Morrowind is the simplest by far of all of them.
Yeah, because I mean, really listen to Morrowind's music, and if you listen to that music without the game, you would not for 1 second think that it takes place in this weird alien world where people herd jellyfish like cows and ride giant ticks and all sorts of weird shit like that. Like you would expect some kind of weird electronica alien soundtrack to go along with that. You wouldn't expect the familiar fantasy music that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. So that's the point I was trying to make. That I think, to your point, they were maybe trying to ground it a bit more, give you something to latch onto.
Which is something that one movie did really well, which was Guardians of the Galaxy. Like they used familiar. I don't want to go off into a tangent, but I'm just saying that is, in my mind, like a movie that did it really well, where they grounded like the weird fantasy space, like adventure, but with really familiar music, so that you are like, okay, I'm along for this ride. And I think that may be what Morrowind was trying to do. But maybe
definitely.
So that kind of wraps up the style, I think, of the soundtrack. So we're gonna go ahead and end this particular part of our discussion.